You responsible for? Those of us that are codependent or have just been raised in a dysfunctional family or in a dysfunctional relationship or toxic relationship, we take on too much responsibility. We not only feel responsible for ourselves, but we feel responsible for other people. We feel responsible for what they do, what they feel, what they think, what they choose. And the most negative fallout of that is the fact, not aside from the fact that we are just overwhelmed and feeling way too much guilt and way too much heaviness, is that the other person doesn't have to carry responsibility for their part. And that means that they're not going to change their behavior because they're not going to experience the consequence and I could feel it. We're going to feel it. We're going to feel responsible for fixing it and for changing it or changing the other person. And if we don't change that other person, change their behavior, we're going to feel like the consequences are our fault. So let me give you a scenario and put yourself in this situation and see what you would answer. Okay, if you were having a discussion with a family member and that discussion got heated and that person reacted and you ended up in an argument and that person stomped out of the room, slammed the front door, got behind the wheel of a car, drove fast, and hit a tree. Would you feel responsible? Now, I know you'd probably think, oh my gosh, if only we hadn't had that argument, that person wouldn't have left, wouldn't have gotten behind the wheel of the car, that wouldn't have happened. But do you feel responsible for that? Are you responsible? Responsible meaning who's going to pay for the deductible on the car? Who is going to say, okay, I'm going to fix this problem? If you could answer that, would answer that and say, you know what, I'd feel responsible. Now, I can tell you for myself that I would definitely question myself and think, okay, did I have a part in that? I would, before years ago, even 5 or 6 years ago, I probably would have had a hard time kind of disentangling that and thinking, okay, was I really at fault? I'd have to walk through it. Today, I would think about it and I'd say, no, that wasn't my choice. I didn't get behind the wheel of the car. I was upset too. I didn't get behind the wheel of a car. I didn't run a car into a tree. I'm not taking responsibility for that. But I might ask myself, do I need to apologize for reacting that way, but without taking any responsibility for the car? Now, if the person started blaming you or me for that, who the other person they were in the argument with started blaming and saying it's your fault, you got me mad, then you again have to make a choice. Am I going to take responsibility for that or am I not going to? Sometimes it's harder to let go of responsibility when the other person is blaming you, because if you kind of invalidate yourself or you're a little bit shaky in your validation, then that person, then you might have to kind of go through it, a little more carefully and recognize I can't change that person's opinion, but I'm not taking responsibility for that. So this matters because, there are all kinds of opportunities in relationships to take responsibility. If your child wrecks their car and needs a car to get to work, are you responsible? If your family member gets a DUI and can't drive, are you responsible to drive that person around? Or can you allow that person to walk, take a bus, pay for an Uber, get a friend, ride with a friend, whatever, ride a bike? Are you okay with letting that person bear those responsibilities? Are you responsible for a kid who forgets to do his homework or doesn't study for a test or who leaves the homework at home? Are you responsible to drive that down to the school and give that to the kid so the kid can turn it in? And now you can choose to do that, but are you going to take on the responsibility thinking I should have made sure my kid had that? You've got to decide. You've got to decide if you're responsible for somebody else's bills, somebody else's ability to pay their bills, if they spend money foolishly, if they don't work enough hours, if they choose not to work enough hours, and their rent becomes due. Are you responsible? Are you going to take the responsibility? You're going to pick it up, or are you going to say, that's yours? That's you're responsible for that in your life. I'm not going to step in and fix that for you. And I'm not going to feel guilty. There's something called false guilt. False guilt is when you feel like you've done something wrong when you haven't done anything wrong. When you feel responsible for somebody else's behavior and you feel guilty, that is false guilt because you are not guilty. You are not wrong. You have not done anything wrong. So we have to look at it this way. You are responsible for your choices, your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, your actions, your inactions, your attitudes, the consequences of your choices, your beliefs, and your opinions. The other person is responsible for those same things for themselves. They are responsible for their choices, their thoughts, their feelings, their behavior, their actions, their inactions, their attitudes, their consequences, their beliefs, and their opinions. So when we recognize that because we get to choose, each person needs to bear that responsibility. When other people make a choice, it used to be that when I felt years ago very responsible for people's choices and erroneously thinking that I had the power to get them to change their choices, I would have to ask myself to really just kind of get clear on that. Okay, could they have made another choice? Now, today, I just automatically, when someone makes a choice and I think, oh my gosh, what other choices could they have made? And believe me, there are always other choices. Person can make in just all kinds of choices in a situation. And you also can make choices. And when we choose, we are responsible for the outcome. So very important for you to pay attention to what are you responsible for? What is the other person responsible for? Some people talk about it like being on, like you're on your plate that represents your life. Another person is on their plate, represents their life. That's their stuff that they're responsible for. You're responsible for it. But underlying this, like I said, often is the belief or that you are able to change somebody, you are able to convince them. And if you can't, then you're responsible. And that is absolutely 100% not true. So Deuteronomy 24:16 says, parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sins. So we're each responsible before God for our own sins. Proverbs 29:6 says, evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. Snared by their own sin, their own choices. Acts 18:5 through 6 says, when Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Now, Paul was saying, I told you the way and you made a choice not to follow it. I'm I'm clean. I have no responsibility in your choice. I think that's really important for us to remember in our dysfunctional relationships, especially when other people blame us for their choices. And that goes all the way back to the garden. When Adam and Eve chose to eat the forbidden fruit, Eve blamed Adam, or she blamed the snake. It was said to God, it was the snake that you created, and Adam said it was the woman you gave me. Basically, they were both blaming God. They were saying, you put me in this situation, and it wasn't God's fault, and it wasn't the snakes, and it wasn't the Adam for Eve and Eve for Adam. It was their own individual choice that they could have chosen differently. And for that, they are responsible. So I hope that if you're struggling with this, that this is kind of an easy way for you to remind yourself that you don't have to take on the responsibility for other people's choices and other people's emotions and other people's behavior and other people's consequences. Now, sometimes when we're in a close relationship, like a husband wife, your other when that person makes a choice, it affects you, and it affects you in uncomfortable ways. And sometimes you can't avoid that, but you can do as much as is possible to let the consequences fall on that person and not jump in and bail that person out and not jump in and fix it all the time. So thank you for watching this video and listening to the podcast, because I now put them on the podcast also. And God bless you.